Hey, this is Mr. Sorensen coming to you live from the wood shop here at Royal High School, and today I'm going to show you how to build this house model that we are currently working on in our construction unit. This model really is a great replica of the actual house that you live in, but it's just a much smaller scale. So I'm going to be showing you the process that we want to go through to lay this all out and build it, and you should be able to watch what I do and then follow along building the exact same thing at your house. As I get started working on this house project, one heads up that you may want to consider. If you're using 2x4s and 2x6s that have the purple primer on it, you're going to want to sand those lightly with your sanding block and scuff it up. If you glue to the purple primer that's very shiny and glossy with the glue, it's very unlikely that it will stick well, and you might find yourself starting to pick stuff up and move it and all of that and have it all fall apart, because glue doesn't like to stick very well to glossy surfaces. So how I'm doing it in my project is I'm taking my sanding block from my first kit and I'm simply just a little bit. I don't have to get the purple paint off. I just want to scuff it up. I can feel it's rough now compared to the smooth over here, and I would use it and glue it. So let's start by first finding this page right here. This is the wall elevation. Okay, so you're going to find the wall elevation, and we also want to make use of this plastic bag. And now to get this to fit, right, the bag is a little bit smaller than it could be. So to get it to fit, I'm simply going to come down here to one edge, and I'm just going to fold the edge of the plan.
Please note that this is only needed if you're using the bag that says ice on it.
I want to put the wall elevation page into the plastic bag so that we're going to glue right on top of the bag. We don't want the glue to get on the piece of paper. In fact, we're going to be gluing up several different parts of this house, all of which should be done right on top of the plastic bag. So at this point, you're probably going to have to take all the stuff out of your bag, have it sitting on your workbench so that we can put the actual drawing in the bag, build right on top of it, and we're not going to ruin the picture. I'm going to start with my stud pack, and I'm going to get that out. That's all I should need here at the beginning as well. I'm going to leave everything else attached together so that I'm not getting all the parts and pieces mixed up. The one thing that I'm going to set aside here as well is my extra pieces. The extra has the red line on it. Those are extra material. And then the material that's bound together with a rubber band.
Or loosen your bag.
I'm going to grab those and set them out here because I know that those are additional pieces I can use, not if I make a mistake, but for all the little extra pieces that are needed. I want my pencil, and I'm going to use my glue bottle. So those are the things that I'm going to use right now. And I'm also going to grab my saw, and I'm going to grab the miter box so that all of that is here. Now, the other little piece that I need is the top and bottom plates. The top and bottom plates are marked or labeled with a light green mark. So I'm going to grab those, and then I should be able to get started on my project. So now I'm going to take apart my top and bottom plates. That's what these long pieces are. I'll set those over here. And I'm going to take the plastic off of the stud pack, and I'm going to set those pieces here because I'm going to be using those as I start to build. So I'm going to take my top plate and my bottom plate to start with. I'll take my top and bottom plate, set them on the paper. I'm going to move the top plate up here, set it right on the piece of paper, and I'm going to take one of the studs and lay it in there. And sure enough, it fits as well. So everything looks good. My sizes are correct. The next thing I want to do here now is I'm going to take my bottom plate and I'm going to lay it down here so that it sits right directly on this plan, and I'm going to mark where all of the studs are going to go with my pencil. So this is called layout. And when I was doing construction building houses, this is exactly how we would start. We would lay out where the studs went on the bottom plate and the top plate. So you can see all of the marks in here on the plates. Now I'm going to use that plate to lay out the opposite plate, since they both have to line up right on top of each other. With my pieces now laid out, I'm going to use the end of my miter box, right? If you look at the end of my miter box right there, it actually looks a lot like a tri-square. A nice right angle, cut very perpendicular. So I'm going to use my miter box as a tri-square or a speed square, and I'm simply going to slide it along and use the bottom plate to lay out the top plate, so that all these marks line up perfectly with one another. Right, and then when I separate these and I turn them to face each other, all the little marks will line up. I can also come back and put generally I'll put an X which will indicate where the little pieces are going to go. When there are two studs like you see next to each other here in this layout, that generally indicates that there's a window or a door. In this case, right through here is a window. So the outside, I'm going to put a K instead of an X on there. The outside is the king stud. The king stud goes floor to ceiling, and then on the inside of that we're going to have trimmers and all of the window detail or the door detail.
All right, let's get started on cutting our project.
The first thing I want to look for is I'm going to grab the header material, and we're going to cut that first. The header material is a single piece of wood in your bag. It's about 9 or 10 inches long. It's square, so there's no other piece of wood like it. It's square, and we're going to use that to cut the header. Now there's two ways I can do this. There's the easy way and the harder way. The harder way would be for me to take a tape measure, which is fine. That's what I would probably be doing on a job site. And I'm going to measure the length of the header that I need. So here we have a header, and this is the one over the window. It's 3.5 inches long, 3.5 inches long. So I'm going to just simply put my tape measure on my header material. I'm going to put a mark at 3.5 inches, and I'm going to cut that.
Here is a place that I'm going to really highly suggest you use your cardboard that I gave you in the bridge building. If you don't have it anymore, I'd go get a box out of the trash can, cut yourself a little piece of cardboard. I'm going to set the piece of cardboard up there like that, and I'm going to set my miter box on it like that.
And I want to take into consideration the kerf, because the saw blade is going to cut up some of this material. So I don't want to make it too long, I don't want to make it too short.
So I'll set my window header up here.
And it looks to be pretty close to the size that I needed. Next, I want to cut the header over the door. And to do that, I told you I would do it both ways. So to do that, I'm simply going to take the header material and I'm going to simply lay it on the picture. Then I'm going to come over and mark it with the other side of the header. Here it is. I'm going to go ahead and write on there. Very lightly, I'm going to write on their door, so I remember which one that goes to, and then I'm ready to cut that. So I'm going to grab my miter box again, put that back up against the side of the table, And then I'm just gently going to get my cutting started. All right, there's my header material. So one of the things you may end up having to do, depending on how your cutting goes, is you may at this point want to bring your sanding block into the picture. Because if you look at the end of your header where you just cut it, and you notice, right, now I'm going to do this with a tri-square, but even if you don't have a tri-square, you could just look at it. If it appears to be pretty crooked and it has a pretty severe angle on the end of it, you don't want that. It's going to potentially cause some problems. So I'm going to show you, here's how I would solve that. If I look at my header or any other blocks that I cut and they don't look very flat on the end, I'm just going to simply take it like this, put it on my sanding block, and move it back and forth. Then I can look at it again. Right, that seems to look a little better. Now I can bring it back up and put it back up on my, and I think that did it. So that's how I would use my sanding block. If I notice that some of my cuts are not very square on the ends and I want to fix that so that everything fits better together, then by all means use that sanding block to do that. All right, so I have two more of the pieces now ready to go. The header for each, the door and the window. Then I notice above the header for the window, there are some tiny blocks that have to be cut there. And I notice that underneath the header, inside the window, there are some pieces there. So to cut all the rest of the little blocks and the trimmers and the cripples, everything that has to be cut for that front wall, I'm going to go to my extra kit. So I'm going to come over here to these two. I'm going to use my extras for this.
I'm not going to use the 25 studs that came in my stud pack until I absolutely have to.
So to cut up some of these little pieces, I'm going to use some of the material in my extras kit. Now, this piece is clearly not the right size of it. It's not the same size as a stud. It's much smaller. That's because these were extra leftover pieces. That's okay. All right, I'm just going to cut up as many blocks as I can cut out of here. Then I'll grab another extra piece. To cut this piece out, I'm simply going to lay it on my pattern, lay it on my template. I'm going to mark the side. This is called the window sill. So we have a header that goes above the window and a sill that goes underneath the window. So I'm going to write window on it. Now I grab my saw and cut it. Now I have these two additional top plate. I have a top plate and a bottom plate that are sitting here. I'm going to set those out of the way. I'm going to set them back over here with all my other stuff. Otherwise, I'm going to get them mixed up. I can't get them mixed up with the studs. They are 11 inches long. I need them 11 inches long. If you cut them up for other stuff, there's no way to replace that. So I'm going to move them away so I don't accidentally cut them. And I'm going to come over here and grab another one of my practice pieces, my scrap pieces. And again, I'm just going to lay it on here and mark it right on the drawing. Now, I need 3 or 4 of those, so I'm just going to lay that piece on top of this and mark it. Go over here, lay it on there, and mark it. Now I see on here, I noticed something, which is that these pieces of 2x4 are not perfectly straight, right? But that's really the case. That's okay. Don't be alarmed by that. In a real construction job with real lumber, you're gonna go through a stack of hundreds of boards. And some of them are gonna have chips out of the side. Some of them are gonna have knots that have fallen out. Some of them have the area where the bark used to be, which is called wane. And you just pick up the board and use it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to match perfectly the board in front of it or after it. You just use the boards that are there. Only if the board is thoroughly damaged, like it was splintering and literally falling apart, where if you put weight on it, it would just crush. That board I would take off and throw in the scrap pile. But anything else I'm just going to use, even if it isn't perfect. So I noticed that this board that I picked up to cut these pieces from, it's a little more narrow than these other 2x4s. Not a problem. I'm going to use it anyway. And I would run into those same kinds of issues on an actual job. All right, well, you can see here, I'm getting close. I have the parts below the window and the windowsill cut. Now I need to add to it. There's my header. I need to add to it the little blocks above, and then I have that section done. So once again, I'm going to turn to my scrap material. I'm not using anything out of my stud pack for this. I'm going to mark the 2x4 right on the picture. Grab my saw. All right, I need 4 of them. So I'll go ahead and just use that one to mark the next one. I've got my blocks cut. I'm just going to double check that the header and the windowsill are the same length, right? They, according to my plan, they're exactly the same length. If they're different sizes here, this isn't going to work very well. So I'm going to double check them. They're pretty close. The header is just a hair bigger. So this might be a good place to come in and sand it just a tiny bit. I just want those to feel like they are exactly the same length. That feels better. And now I can use all of my pieces to go ahead and lay this out. All right, and you can see how that's going to work. Again, this is exactly what I would do on a wall in a real house, and I would lay it out just like this on the floor in front of me. Once I got it all nailed together, I could stand that wall up. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the door, just like you saw me do here, and then I'll come back and we'll finish it up. All right, well, very quickly I went ahead and cut up the rest of that stuff. Now I'm just about done, and I'm just about ready to assemble my first wall section here. the front wall, which is the main part of this structure. For our front wall section, we're going to make two types of posts, corner posts and a partition post. The corner posts and the partition posts are all built using the same material, the same identical material. However, the way they go together is slightly different. Let me zoom you in here and I'll show you how this is going to be made. When I look at my drawing here, I notice that there are 3 blocks in each of the corner posts. Now I'm using scrap pieces that are left over from other things that I've cut that are too small for anything else. And for my third piece, I will go ahead and cut my last block. So the size of the blocks is not really all that important. The key is that for the corner posts, I'm going to sandwich 3 blocks in between 2 studs. And I need to do that twice. I have a corner post on each side of my wall. And then in the center, I'll use the same exact pieces, but I'm going to glue them together differently. That's going to make up my partition post. So I'll start by gluing together my corner posts. So I'm going to put a little glue in the center and at the top and bottom. And I'll do the same thing on the right side. I'll put a little bit of glue at the center, the top, and the bottom. For the corner post, I'm going to sandwich all the pieces together like that. I want to make sure that the 2 ends are lined up perfectly straight. I don't want the little block sticking out too far. I'd rather it stick back in a little bit than out too far. And that looks pretty good. I'm just going to hold that flat, make sure everything is flat. I'm going to make sure the ends are nice and straight, and then I'm going to pinch that together. I'm going to hold it for the count of 25. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 22, 23, 24, 25. All right, that one looks good. I'll go ahead and lay out my other corner post, and then we'll be ready to work on making the partition post. What we're going to work on right now is our partition post that goes right here next to the door. I'm going to use the same components. However, instead of standing the blocks up on edge like that, I'm simply going to lay the blocks down on their face, and I'm going to glue the 2 2x4s next to them like that. That's the difference. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to put glue on the top, middle, and bottom of my 2x4 stud and push it up next to these 3 blocks. And then I'll do the same thing here with this 2x4 and in the center. And then I'm going to put that up next to the 2x4. And remember, the 2x4 lays on its face. These little blocks are on their face instead of on their edge. Now I'm going to let that dry, and that becomes my partition in the center of my wall. All right, so I'm done with all of the cutout now. Before I move on and actually glue this, I'm going to go ahead and lay it all back out one more time. I'd much rather find my mistakes right now than once these things are all covered with glue. So this is called dry fitting. We might do it in a real wall, we might do it in a wood shop when we're building cabinetry or furniture. We always want to dry fit something and make sure it all fits together first and everything's correct before we start adding glue. Now what I want to do here is just kind of look it over and make sure that I don't have any problems. One of the problems I might run into is some blocking with splinters, or just cut at an angle or something like that, that starts to get in the way. These pieces won't, right, all go together because something's too long. In order to fix any of the blocks that are too long, I'm going to set it with my sanding block and simply come back in and try to sand them down a little bit. If I had to choose between too long or too short is going to serve me a little bit better. And now I'm going to put the top and bottom plate on there. So I'm going to start by getting my ends together. And I can see roughly where the glue goes because I marked my top and bottom plate. Well, because the plates have been marked, I know right where to put my glue. So I'll make sure to do that on both of the plates. And if I get a little too much, I want to go ahead and wipe most of that off. And now I can go ahead and put the wall together. With the glue on both the top and the bottom plate, I'm ready to put the wall together. But I have a critical part right here, which is I need this wall to be square. My drawing is square, but more importantly, I need the wall itself to be square. So it's really critical at this point that I use my template. I use my wall picture. I lay this on it and I get everything lined up perfectly even with that picture, and then I hold it like that for the count of maybe 50. I'm just going to hold it. Make sure the corners are very flush on the outside of the top and bottom plate. There should be no overhanging pieces, if possible. $45, $46, $47, $48, $49, $50. Now, I worked really hard at trying to keep the parts lined up with the paper template, and it looks pretty good. What I might do at this point would be to walk away for 20 minutes and come back, or start cutting some other pieces, or lay out something else, right? Check on that. But I might just let this sit for a few minutes before I go any further. Now that the wall section is glued together, I've made this frame. I've connected the two ends. This is how I would probably do it if I were doing this in a real job. I would connect the two ends together using my corner posts, and then I would fill the rest in. Now the reason I would do that is because when I put these other pieces in and I start nailing them from this end, that when I hit that 2x4, the 2x4 is going to want to take off across the floor. So by creating my frame first and then nailing these in, as I hit the nail on this side, the 2x4 cannot go anywhere. It's trapped in there. So this is probably how I would put it together on a job site. Now, once I got this frame together and I started putting pieces in there, the other thing I want to do is I want to see to it that it's square. One of the most important things we do on this project is make sure this front wall section is square so that everything beyond it fits correctly. Now, here's how I check it for square. I'm gonna use a tape measure, or my ruler would work, and I'm going to basically measure diagonally from this corner to this corner. and take a reading on my ruler. This says 13 3/4. Now I'm going to take and read diagonally from this corner down here. That says 13 3/4. When both of those numbers read diagonally are identical, your rectangle or your box is square. If one of those numbers was bigger than the other one, that would mean that my wall section was out of square, and I would need to adjust it until both readings are the same. This one here, both readings are the same. I've tried to match it as best I could to my picture, and so it looks pretty square. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish adding in all the pieces that need to fill in this wall section. Now, my next job is I'm going to start adding in the other pieces. I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the ends. And again, I'm going to come in and lay this directly on the picture in front of me. It is so critical that everything lines up. It's really no different than it would be in a real house. The more square and accurate the framing is, the easier the job becomes for the electrician, the plumber, especially the drywall person. So I do myself and a lot of other folks who come after me a big favor by making sure all this is as accurate as I can get it, as square as I can get it. So far so good. I'm adding in all my full-length studs at this point. The key is that all of these full-length studs really line up with the picture so that everything is very straight. None of the walls or openings end up being crooked. So I really want to work hard at making sure that when I look at from the top view, when I look at this picture, everything is lining up with the pencil marks below. Because the pencil marks are very accurate. So these are trimmers. This first stud that I put in right here is called a king stud, right? The king stud is the one that defines how big this is going to be, but it's holding up all the weight on each side of the door. Now the trimmer is what the header is going to sit on. So inside the king stud goes a trimmer. That might work if I want to do that. Here's a place where I can add some of my clamps in there. And now the door header goes right there on top of that. Above the door is where the cripples are going to go. Now, all of these names, you might find mom or dad, grandma or grandpa, uncle, aunt, maybe even your neighbor, who might say, well, we call it by this name. So there are a lot of names, and the names can change depending on what era you grew up in, when you know. So just note that you might find somebody who calls these by a different name, and that's okay. Now you might wonder what I'm doing here. I'm actually recutting a couple of the blocks because they didn't fit very well. So that is a possibility. And so that fits a little bit better. Now I'm going to take and kind of custom fit it using my sanding block to make sure it all fits. That's really snug. So it's really close. I'm just going to take it down a little bit more. Now I want to be careful because this sanding probably can go way too fast and I could end up with a block that won't fit at all. So that fits really nicely. I want to be careful not to go much further than that. So the sanding works great and it can go fast. Be careful with it. All right, so now it's time to put these blocks in. They fit a lot better now than they did. Now here's a block that's kind of chewed up. So even if I was working on a real house, here's what I would do. I want the bad edge facing out towards the street. It's a lot easier to get wood siding and stuff like that to pass right over the top of a bad block. But if you got a bad block sticking into the interior of the house, the drywall is going to have problems. So, all right, so now that section is done. And now I need to move over. I'll move over here and finish up my window section. I'm going to start down here. At the bottom. These are called cripples. Some people call them jack studs. So again, it really depends on who you learn and where you learn. But we're going to put our cripples on there. And then I'm going to put my sill. In there. On top of the sill now goes a trimmer on each side. And what we're doing here is distributing the weight, right? We have to get the weight to come down from the header. It's got to come around the window. We don't want any weight on that window or you'll just crush the window. You'll break your window. So I'm going to put that on there. When I set my trimmers on the sill, I noticed that they are both a little bit tall. They're getting into the way of the header up here. So now's a good time to come back, grab my sanding block, and remember, it goes fast with 80 grit sandpaper. Look at it. Woo! I can see my pencil line now. So that's it. I'm going to stop. Still a little tall. Now I can see the pencil line. So I'm just dry fitting them here. Now that I can see the pencil line, I can come back, add my glue. Right, typically you would just throw a couple of nails in there. We're not going to do that. We'll replace the nails with some sort of fastening agent like glue. Alright, I'm going to take that there and that. Now when I look here, I can see that the studs don't all line up in the face, and that's okay. That's very typical, even in a real house. That could be that way, and it'll be fine. Throw my header over the top of the door like that. And now I just need to fill in my blocks here and my two cripples or jack studs down here, and I am done with my first wall. Now what I remember is that I sanded down my trimmers quite a bit, which means that now these cripples are all a bit short. So what I might want to do is I could go ahead and get to this point, leave the little short blocks, the cripples out, and then mark them and cut them at this point. You might want to do it that way. That might be a better way to do it. So our front wall is now completed. You see that behind me here on the table. I've got my two end posts, I've got my partition post, and then I've got my doorway and my window, and it's all glued together. I'm going to now let that sit and dry. I really made sure that my edges were very square and lined up perfectly with my template so that I get a finished product that's very square, and that's going to help the rest of the house go together well. I'll move on. I'm going to let this dry and I'll move on to something else now. The last thing I need to do is over here on the side is a small wall. So there's two short walls that have to be built. They're about 3 inches long, and they're going to stick on the sides. They're going to come off the sides of the big wall. So I need to build those. That's next. I have one of them done already, so I've got that one ready to go. I'm now using the other half of the drawing inside my bag and my remaining studs to cut out and create my 3 partial walls. So I have one done, and I'm finishing up the second one here, and then I'll be ready to move into literally assembling the bottom part raising the walls, putting them all together, and I can turn my attention to the roof structure.
To make the top plates for these small half walls, I will either use some scrap material if I have some, or I can use the top plate material that came with the kit. It's the light green material. And I'll mark them right here on the drawing. If you look to the right side of the drawing, you've got a small half wall, and I marked the top plate and the bottom plate here, and then I'm going to cut these to length and use some of my stud material to assemble the wall.
I'll take the second top plate or bottom plate right off of the first one, since they're going to have to match each other anyway. Alright, so there's my top plate for the short wall and my bottom plate. I'll set my studs aside. I'm going to mark them. I'm going to lay them out just like I did on the big wall. So I'm going to mark it where the stud goes. With my pieces now laid out, I'm going to use the end of my miter box, speed square, and I'm simply going to slide it along and use the bottom plate to lay out the top plate, so that all these marks line up perfectly with one another. And I'm going to put an X in each of the marks. So I can see where the studs go. So there's my pieces, and they're now ready to put the studs in. So I'll put my glue on. I'm going to start by putting the stud at each end. Now the key to putting this big wall and these small walls together is just to remember they really have to be square. I want to line them up with the lines on the paper. And that's critical. It's not just a good idea, it's critical that they're square. Otherwise they're not going to fit together and sit straight, and it's just going to be a big mess. So here's the last wall. I'm going to add my 2x4 studs in there, and that wall section's done and ready to go. So in the entryway, I'm going to separate my entryway from the window next door. Maybe the window represents a bedroom. So I would have a partition wall there. I'm going to go ahead and build that third small wall. So for this project we need 3 small walls and 1 big wall. The front face wall and 3 small walls. So I'm going to finish up by building my small partition wall that's going to separate the door from the window. To start with, I'll cut my top plate and my bottom plate, and I can find a 2x4, extra 2x4 for that. Remember, to build the walls, it works very well to lay the pieces right directly on the template. Mark them and cut them. So I have my wall section here. Again, as I've been building it, it's really important that I keep it aligned perfectly with that picture, because the picture is drawn square. So I want my wall section to be square as well. Now I need my last piece here. throw it back, make sure it's sitting exactly square on my template. Push all the pieces should line up exactly with the picture. That means everything is very, very square. Here are the finished pieces for my wall sections. These are ready to go together to create the structure, the framing of the house that the roof and ceiling are going to fit on. I need my foundation or my slab. And at this point, if I wanted to, I might want to take my sanding block. I could come back and I could just clean up anywhere there's glue on a joint. If I wanted to sand the ends to make them flat so that that's nice and flat, I could do that. So at this point, any kind of cleanup work that I might want to do, I could work on with my sanding block. And I'm ready to raise the walls and attach them together. So I need the 3 wall sections. I'm going to need the 3 wall sections for this, but I'm also going to need my last top plate. So the way we're going to build this is with a double top plate. The double top plate ties all the walls together. And so I'm going to set that here. And I'm going to do some last minute sanding and we'll raise the walls. On a job site, this house and these walls would be laid out on the slab, and you'd get a couple guys or girls underneath the slab over here or underneath the wall section, and you'd start raising it up. You just push and push and push and push until you brought it up into the vertical position like that, and it would be sitting on the slab. Generally you mark the slab right where the wall goes. Or maybe you line it up with the end of the slab. Now in this case, we also have some side walls, so we would do the same thing here. We would get down and we would raise that side wall all the way up until it was in the vertical position as well. And the 2 of those things together would hold the wall up. The 2 of those things together would hold the wall up. So we would attach it or drive a nail in temporarily to attach it and hold it. And there we are. There's our structure, our front door. We've got a nice window and some side walls. That's ready to glue and tie together. And then we will move on to the next piece. At this point, I'm going to glue my wall sections to my foundation. The short extension walls, the small little bay goes towards the front wall, and that should give me a 16-inch on center 2x4 layout. And the same thing will be true on this other wall over here. So I'm going to glue these on now. In a real home, right, we would be tying this down with some sort of anchoring device. So we might be using anchor bolts or some sort of strapping. Here we're just going to use plain old glue. And I'm going to test these. Try to make them flat so when I put glue on them and stick it up there, Now the 2x4, the wall would be nailed on. I'm not going to put the clamps on it. They're just not quite big enough. If you had some clamps, you could do that. But these little clamps are too small, and they put undue amounts of pressure on it, and it's causing the walls to kind of spread out. So I'm just going to leave the walls sitting there. In most cases, it turns out that gravity is a great clamp, and it'll hold all this stuff down right where it needs to be while I give it a chance to dry. I'm going to add my last short wall section. I can feel some glue on there, so I'm just going to knock that all off, get it as flat as I can get it. I want the small opening facing my front wall, so I'm going to flip it over like that. And I'm just going to make sure that the outside of the wall is flush. All the way up. So I just made sure that the surface right here is flush. The surface along the bottom that sits along the foundation is flush, and that's what you would do in the real house. The front sits very flush with the foundation, so this looks really good. All right, well, here's my house that is together. Here's the partition wall, right? So these are the exterior walls of a home. Exterior walls carry the weight of a roof. Those are called bearing walls, and they have a foundation and a footing, particularly a footing underneath them. The footing, as we learned, is usually it's either 12 or 18 inches by 18 inches if it's a post, or it would be 18 inches wide, and it would travel the entire length of the entire perimeter of the house. That's the footing down in the ground that is able to bear up the weight of all of the roof material. This partition wall now simply gets added in like that and taken out. So we're going to add in our partition wall, and then we're going to do our double top plate, so the double top plate locks in everything, and we will be done with our framing of our walls. All right, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my partition wall and I'm going to insert it here, and I'm going to glue it to this partition post. And notice the blocks that I put them sideways, so they were the wide width. That's exactly the width of this 2x4 stud right here. So when I put it up there, it fits perfectly, and it leaves a corner where I can put drywall. I look around here, same thing. I have a corner on both sides where drywall can be nailed or screwed. So that's really why we build a partition post like this, so that this wall can be put up against it, and we have a nice corner for drywall and a nice corner for drywall in both places. So I'm going to put glue on my project, and since I'm gluing to paint there, and I'm going to eventually glue to paint here, I'm just going to scuff those up a little bit with my sandpaper. I'm going to put glue on the back wall, and I'm going to put glue on the bottom where it sits on the floor, and I will put my partition wall, slide it right into the floor on the foundation, and up against my partition post. Make sure it runs nice and straight right up the parallel with the 2x4 that's there, and that looks pretty good. This would make me think of really a house, right? You come in the entryway and there might be a little entryway area, and then around the corner would be a bathroom, a bedroom, a living room, but you might have a partition wall in there. So there we go. We've got our walls in place. Now we need to lock these together up here on the top with a double top plate. There's my top plate there. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to glue all three of the small walls. I'll glue all three of the double top plates across, and that'll lock those walls onto this front wall. And then I'll fill in a little piece here and a little piece here. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark this right on my actual project. Again, I'm going to just go ahead and mark my pieces right on the actual wall itself. All right, so there's my three locking two top plates, right? They're gonna lock because they cross over top here, and then I'm gonna cut some pieces here. Well, we are just about done with our walls of our house. The last thing we need to do now is attach the double top plate. So I've gone ahead and cut all the top plates, and I just measured them right on the house itself. So there's all my pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom you in here, and we'll glue them on, and I'll be done with part one of making the model house. Now, just like a real house, once the walls have all been raised and you've added your interior walls, we're going to go back and we're going to add the double top plate. The double top plate allows us to lock this side wall together with this front wall. You can see right here, this one stops, this one starts. What we need to do with our top plate is overlap and lock that together. So we're going to do that. I've got a little bit of purple paint. Like I mentioned, anytime I have purple paint, I want to scratch it up a little bit with my sandpaper. So I'm going to overlap the short walls first. I'm going to go ahead and put on the double top plate on all the short walls. And because I have to put my roof down on top of all of this, I'm going to go ahead and glue the purple sides together here, scuff them up a little bit. That way when I set my roof down on top of this, I'm not setting it on the purple. All right, last short piece drawn. Now all of these smaller walls, the top plate overlaps onto the big wall. That locks them into place. Now all we need to do is fill in this empty spot here. So I'll put my glue on. All right, here's my last top plate. And there we go. Well, there's my final top plate, and now we've got a double top plate all the way around all of the walls. You can see right here where this double top plate overlaps the top. This one overlaps that front wall. This one overlaps the front wall. That locks these smaller walls onto that big wall. And then these are really just space fillers. They fill in the space so that when we put our roof rafters down now, it has a flat surface to sit on. So we're done with our walls, the framing of the walls. We're done with part one, and we're ready to move on to part two, building the roof structure.